Education is more than certificates or credentials. For generations, it has maintained its place as one of humanity's most powerful equalizers, the bridge between potential and opportunity. Because unlike wealth or status, knowledge gained can never be taken away. This is what shapes the belief that education is the bedrock that defines the kind of nation we are and could become. According to a 2023 UNICEF report, approximately 10.2 million children of primary school age are out of school in Nigeria, accounting for the highest figure in the world. The use of technology in Nigeria's education system needs to be accelerated, and educators need access to resources and training for learning to be more inclusive, relevant, and transformative. Welcome back to another episode of the Leading Woman Show Season 4 themed The Nigeria We Want, brought to you by our partners, the National Endowment for Democracy and Luminate. I'm your host, Abosede Jojogan. Today, we will examine the true and perceived value of a Nigerian education. Is it worth the premium that parents and their wards place on it as an investment that can lift their families out of poverty and give them a fighting chance? Beyond certificates and degrees, does it truly prepare young Nigerians to solve problems, build sustainable livelihoods, and excel on global stages? We will explore how Nigeria can reimagine education by embracing vocational training, supporting creativity, and designing inclusive systems that cater to all learners, regardless of ability or background. Our guests today are educators who bring depth, experience, and value to this conversation. Now, welcome with me, Molade Adeniyi, a visionary educator, purpose-driven leader, and nation builder. She currently serves as Chief Executive Officer of Teach for Nigeria. She's at the forefront of the national movement for educational equity with over a decade of cross-sector leadership experience. Our next guest is Abiodun Emmanuel Odogun, the coordinator of God's Hands Development Therapy, an organization dedicated to integrating children with special needs into society. With over 15 years of experience providing special needs interventions for schools, families, and organizations. His work is deeply personal, having overcome his own early learning challenges with dyslexia. And finally, we have Dr. Ronke Shoyombo, an accomplished educationist and business lawyer with over 30 years of teaching experience in Nigeria and the United Kingdom. In May 2025, she was appointed Registrar and the Chief Executive of the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria, and currently serves as Deputy Secretary General of the Africa Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities. I'm sure you cannot wait to dive into this conversation. So let's dive in. Welcome to today's episode, where we're talking about rethinking the value of a Nigerian education. And I'm really happy to welcome you all to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so we have a big task ahead of us today in this short conversation. We want to really rethink the value of a Nigerian education. And where do I want to start? Molade, I want to start with you. Mm-hmm. When you look back, what did your Nigerian education really give you? What did it offer you? Was it survival skills, real knowledge, or did you just get a certificate?
So this is a very interesting question. It's so great to be here. And this is a topic that I love. I could talk about it, forever and ever and ever. So I was fortunate to go to the UK for my A-levels. And when I did my A-levels in the UK, I did math with statistics, chemistry, and biology. Those were my 3 A-level subjects. And believe it or not, I scored 150 out of 150 in math.
No way.
And I know that I would not have been able to do that without the foundation that I had in QC. So I say that to say my Nigerian education gave me some things, but also, dealt me a hand on some other things as well. So not all bad. I think is where I'm driving to.
Fabulous. Dr. Sheyombo, what is the value of the Nigerian education that you received?
That I've received. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me this afternoon. I will say that I went to public school and for my primary school and for my secondary school, and also went to University of Lagos. But the value that I got in education was, in as much as the content was excellent, also value was part of it. Value actually permeates everything that we did in education. How to relate to people, how to listen, and that particular education gave me a lot of opportunities. Because when I traveled abroad, I realized that the only thing is, I did education in University of Lagos, and I realized that when I got to UK, I realized I had to unlearn what I learned in order to relearn new things. Because the way I was taught when it comes to pedagogy, the way I was taught on quite a lot of values as a teacher was completely different from what I was expected to do. So I had to relearn a lot of things. However, I must say that the subject knowledge that I had was from Nigeria. So there are quite a lot of good things going on in Nigerian education, but at the same time, we've lost the values. Because if I compare that time to this time now, we've got to actually rethink about what comes onto education line.
I really like that. So what you're saying is not only did the Nigerian education add value to you, but it also taught you values.
It taught me values,
right?
yes.
Which is what you say is currently missing. Abiodun, let me come to you. What do you think that the value of a Nigerian education was in your journey?
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. So I'll speak from the standpoint of someone that has learning difficulties. So it's more of a 50-50 thing for me. The good thing is, back then we have communal learning. We can close from school and we are all going home. I went to public school as well. So we all go home in groups, gisting and having to chat all the way back. But these days it's more private. And so we are having more of privately induced needs because we don't have so much of social values passed around ourselves anymore. From the car to the school bus, from the school bus to the car. In those days, not so many school buses, not so many private schools, So we're more like, get to, be together. The ones that are struggling will be held along. But these days, if you're struggling, if you don't have a support system that your parents can provide for you, you are on your own.
On your own, literally.
So that's basically what it's like for me.
Fabulous. Molade, I want to come to you. What would you say are the challenges that we currently have with the education system in this country?
How long do we have for this answer? So when I get asked this question, I always like to start with this premise that we have come a very, very long way. And it's important that we state that fact because otherwise we stay in the past and don't really push forward to what is possible in the future. There are still some issues, but I do think that from where we were coming from to here, there's so much innovation, creativity that has been done in the country. So overcrowded classrooms, infrastructure, lack of basic infrastructure in some places. Some of the schools that we see don't have a toilet. Just basic things that you just expect to be there. Some schools don't have chairs and tables. So the environment, the learning environment is not enabling. Let's then move to underpaid teachers. So, I say that teachers should be, the teaching profession should be one of the most respected professions in our country. However, with the underpaid, undertrained, sometimes you find people moving away, even those that have education degrees drifting away. So you don't have the teachers that you need in the classroom. And then let's just talk about 21st century, moving the classrooms into 21st century. So the digital technology, access to all of those is just not, available.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that continue to plague. And like I said, we could go on and
yes.
on and on and on. But those are some of the basic things.
Yes.
Outdated curricula is another. I know that recently there has been upgrades to our curriculum. But even with that, we need to start asking ourselves, what is the practical implementation of that curriculum? What does it really look like? So these are some of the issues that we're sort of still griping with. And maybe the last thing I would say, let's remember that majority of our children in Nigeria are in public schools, not in the private schools. So we really need to start solving those problems to see tangible change in our public schools.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Dr. Shiombo, what would you add to that as some of the critical challenges that we face and that we must fix?
Thank you very much. I think the key one is government. We've got to have education on the front burner as something that should take an important part in the budget of the country. We should give it more attention, the way we give roads attention. We need to give our children attention because we're talking of future leaders. We're talking of human capital development. We have the highest rate of youth at the moment. And if we're saying we're about 217 million in Nigeria, where we have over 40% of our youth to be within that range of being in basic education and secondary education with tertiary, then that needs to be given enough attention. So to me, I feel we have not given it enough attention in every part of the country. And some states are doing really well. They're giving it the attention. However, it's not gone, it hasn't gone round yet. So, and teachers also should be taken as priority because if we raise the profile of teachers, it will allow them to actually give better service in schools. So that's something that we need to look at. The other thing is the Alpha generation child is very different from the Generation Z, Generation X. The Alpha generation child only understands the use of digital equipment. And this is a time where we have to up our game. And I'm going to give you a figure. People are going to, I've got teachers, about 21,000 or almost 22,000 teachers will be sitting for TRCN exam in the next few days, from the 20th to 22nd. When I look at how people register, only about 4,000 registered online. Wow. The remaining 17,000 went into our offices to go and register physically. And that speaks volume to you.
Wow.
I have some states where at least more than half of them registered online. But some states, maybe 3 teachers out of about 1,000 registered online.
Wow.
That's to tell you that there is a need for us to give attention. I'm not talking of where development partners will only go to schools and train like 120 teachers. No, we've got to actually go back to the drawing board that how do we do mandatory continuous professional development for every teacher, and also for leaders of different states to see the need that we need to change the mindset that our classroom sets. The children going to private schools, you see what they have access to. The children going to those public schools only go there for 4 walls of the classroom, no gadgets, no resources to support their teaching and learning. But I know we have few states now that are actually doing a lot. I went to Enugu. I was really, really dazed because Enugu has about 256 newly built smart schools, smart city schools. And in every class, there's a WOWBI board.
Wow.
So the key thing is, when I worked with those people as well, what I want to see is Are people using the Walby boards as the blackboard, or are they using it interactively? So there's a need for digital literacy skills to come into Nigeria as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much. Abiodun, what would you add to that in terms of the challenges? Obviously, from the angle of, people with learning difficulties.
So basically, thank you very much. I will talk more about teachers training because I've been to some schools, some classrooms, and when a teacher hears that this child is having a need, there is a lot of worry in your faces, like, I'm not trained to do this. I can't undo this. And if you observe, back in the days, in the community where I grew up, right, we have about 4 or 5 public schools built in there. Those compounds now are lorry parks. Trailers are now using those compounds. It means the schools are no longer giving the value is expected to have. Now, we are giving rooms to tankers, trailers. That's now a parking spot for them, because the value now given to the education, public education, is reducing because everybody now should outsource their education. Private schools are thriving because the value of the public school is dropping on a daily basis. So if our school, just like Dr. said, is giving priority, we put infrastructures in place that could compete with some level of private schools. You see, a lot of parents are paying out of pockets to ensure that children get the services and the value of education they should get.
Yes.
Some are even in debt, debt in years that they have to go pay later because they're trying to get the best for their child. Now, coming back to a child with need now, the teachers need to also learn. That's not every individual learn the same way. So differentiation needs to also be something that teachers will need to learn. The way I learn is not the way doctor will learn, right? And if I'm teaching a class of 20, I have 20 different learners. I need to be able to get them into what I'm teaching.
Absolutely.
All right. And then we need to also understand that while we're working with these children, we need to individualize their learning. If I learn in a digital way, like Doctor said, you need to interact with me more in digital ways. If I'm a tactile learner, bring the materials to me. I have a friend that dropped out of school when we were in SS2. Now he's a big boy in Abuja. He's into tech, all right? But while we were in school, he struggled to read. He struggled, just like I struggled too. But I was opportune to be able to move around it because I could get a D, and move on. But he was way behind. But now he went into solar system and he's doing very well. Now we're planning to have a reunion. And when he spoke about it, we were like, how far have you gone? Because what he's learning now was made real for him.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to start to do in this generation we're in now.
So, Malade, before we go on a break, I want to just highlight that education is not only getting a degree.
100%.
And, this is a beautiful example you just shared with us. So can we talk a little bit about vocational education, creative education? What are the other education pathways that you would like to highlight?
Yes, so I think that, there's a mindset that has been locked in the minds of many people that for you to succeed in life, you must have a university degree, you must have a credential. And for I'm always shouting this competence over credentials. Talk to employers today. Employers will tell you that those with degrees are not necessarily the ones that are doing best on the job.
That's right.
So when we think about that and the fact that even just in Nigeria, we don't have enough universities for every single young person. So we need to rethink how we think about progression and education. There's vocational training, there's vocational and technical training.
Yes.
There are opportunities for people to be creative. There's a gig economy.
Yes.
There are people who are going into, where he talks about solar. So we talk about vocational. There's solar, there's electrical, there is, there's plumbing, there is the creative economy, there's the film industry, there's production. There is so much. And how do we begin to build schools and give people opportunities to see these as viable options?
Exactly.
I think what has happened for so long is the perception of vocational training has been so low that people see it as a second-class option or a second-grade option. It's either you have a university certificate, anything else you have is nothing. So I think that, again, I come back to what Dr. Shiyomba said about the government. We need to start thinking about perception. This is a viable option. And in many countries, people are thriving doing this profession. And again, in this day and age, young people don't want to be stuck in a classroom for 4 years or 5 years or 3 years or whatever, listening to one lecturer. They want to explore. They want to expand their horizon. So we really do need to start looking at what options exist. And let's learn from other countries that have done amazing work in that area.
Fabulous. So we're still having a conversation about rethinking the value of a Nigerian education, but we'll go on a quick break and we'll continue the conversation when we get back. Welcome back. We're still having the conversation about rethinking the value of a Nigerian education. Dr. Shoyombo, I want to come to you. If you could redesign Nigeria's education system, what are some of the things that you would do?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you very much for that. If I could redesign Nigerian education, I'll start from leadership. Because the experience you gain from the four walls of classroom is different from you managing people and managing resources. And my background is UK, and I remember when I did the head teachers course.
Training.
The training was about 18 months, and it gave me a better insight into how to manage people, how to manage resources, and how to manage learning. Because quite a lot of, sometimes teachers don't understand the fact that the aim of you coming into education is more about learning outcome, is more about you developing the child. So coming back to that question, I'll develop leadership. I'll want to develop teachers because teachers are very, very important, very, very germane to what we're doing. Resources will be something that I cannot actually hide from because we need to be well-resourced, and sometimes we need to know how to improvise, because everybody will say because the economy is not good, so we cannot actually improvise resources. We can. There are so many things we can do managing economy so well without necessarily wasting money to get resources into classrooms, but prioritizing the right things. So that's something I want to do. The other thing I want to do is, I love what Mr. Biodun said, because when it comes to how do we differentiate lessons, we've got to know how to do that, and that goes into the training for the kind of teachers that we have. Everybody must have respect for different groups of children, because at the moment in Nigeria, we are a country that has a lot of gifted and talented students, and we don't actually give them enough support to be able to grow so well, because we must give them a good support with the learning environment where they can thrive, where they can actually make a lot of things. And the other thing is, where you have the less able children, there is ability in disability. That's what my own mantra is. Because for every child, how do I break it down to suit the needs of the child? So there's a need for good training for all our teachers. If we're going to say we want to have a new Nigeria. Not only that, discipline has got to come back to classroom. Because sometimes some teachers want to teach well, but because every teacher is scared at the moment, they don't want to lose the child because of what mom will say. Mom is likely to remove that child from the school. Mom is likely to go to the school across the road. So there has to be discipline. Everybody has got to go back to the drawing board, because at the moment, that is seriously affecting a lot of our private schools. Even in public schools, some parents will go there and beat the teachers just because of lack of discipline. Because I'm looking at Nigeria now, I'm not talking of a particular state. So there is a need for every parent to go back to the drawing board. Support your children, make your child the priority. Even though you go to work, but you must create time out of that no time for that child. Another thing that we must not overlook is safeguarding. Safeguarding has got to come back to Nigeria, because every child has got to feel safe coming to school. There's a lot of atrocities going on sometimes, because you go from school to school, you see pedophiles, a pedophile walked there, and now you're moving to another school, and you're getting away with murder, and there's nobody that child can speak to. So we must have that, we must have people voice in all our schools. And we must celebrate good practice because there are some teachers who are doing excellently well in their schools. Let's bring them out. Allow teachers to actually showcase what they're doing. Allow them to share the good practice within themselves. Above all, how do we celebrate our children when they're really doing well?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Abiodun, if you were to redesign the Nigerian education system, what would you do?
Okay, so thank you very much. Again, I will speak from the point where I'm more comfortable with. I would insist that every school, public, private, has a learning support department. Because we have a system now. I was reading somewhere sometime, and it said we're going towards a generation where we have 70-30 ratio of pupil in a classroom, right? Where 70% of the class will be special. And just 30 will be regular learners. So if I am a teacher in such a classroom, how do I survive 70% of special learners? So if a school is equipped with the appropriate learning support units that would cater for the needs of the children that would not be able to access the traditional curriculum. Curriculum-based learning is still thriving in our schools today. And we need to bring it into individualized learning for some people who will not be able to access the curriculum. So all schools, both public and private, should prioritize learning support departments. Prioritize teaching teachers how to manage children that will struggle in their classrooms. All right. And again, we also need to look at equipping the resources in the school to give room for a functioning sensory room. Because we have children these days of several neurodevelopmental conditions that they have to also manage. These children should have access to schools. And some schools say, we can't take this child because we can't support the child. It's saddening to parents, all right, to have your child rejected because of a condition that they cannot do anything about, in quotes. All right. But again, if the schools are well equipped, the parents will have confidence. My child can go to school and the school will be able to manage my child comfortably. So I would insist a lot more on equipping the schools with appropriate learning support departments to help the teachers. Because a lot of teachers are overwhelmed. Weekend, they are going home, they're like, and on Monday they'll be like, how do I survive this week again?
Not again.
You know, so with the appropriate support, teachers will be very functional in how to deliver the job.
So Malade, what would you add to that?
So, I want to start with a statistic that I always find shocking. UNICEF and UNESCO say that 70% of children in Nigeria that have gone through 6 years of schooling, so that is, if you think of primary 1 to primary 6 as an example, are unable to read a simple sentence and do simple math and solve simple math problems. That's a shocking statistic. For me, I look at it as a ticking time bomb because I keep asking myself, how are they moving from one class to another? And, these are people that are going to go to secondary school, maybe go into university and end up in the workforce. That in itself is a challenge. It's a problem. So I will go back. Dr. Shiomba talked about leadership, but I will go all the way to the government as well and say, let's put our money where our mouth is.
Exactly.
So how can we ensure that education is getting the right amount the allocation in the budget for education is enough and is substantial? I think some, best practice suggests about 18% to 20% of the budget should be allocated to education. And I know that in Nigeria, it's far less than that. I don't want to quote a number because I can't remember the exact statistic. So that's the first thing. Let us put our money where our mouth is. Let us invest in education truly. Beyond the infrastructure and everything else that they have said, this reading and writing problem for me, so if I was to do something different, I would go back to foundational literacy and numeracy across our primary schools. How do we ensure that every single child who finishes primary school can read and write? I feel like that's a basic right for every single child. Once you can read and you can write and you can do simple math problem, you set yourself on a trajectory that no one can bring you back from. So for me, that's a major thing. The budget, they've talked about teacher training, they've talked about all of that. And I think that is extremely, extremely important. But I think the second thing is around curriculum innovation. Dr. Shiomba talked about it as well. Let us have a forward-thinking or a forward-looking curriculum. the curriculum that has served us all of those years, and we all shared our examples, is not going to get us to where we need to get to in the future, where these children are going to be competing on a global stage. So we need to really think about what kind of curriculum we need to actually build the type of, leaders that we need that would lead us tomorrow. So for me, those are some of the major things that I would do about rethinking.
Thank you very much. The key thing that came to my mind is foundational learning. At the moment, when you take early years for instance in Nigeria, we're not there at all.
Non-existent.
Because major education starts from primary and secondary. But the child between the ages of 0 and 6, that is the formative stage. That's when language is formed. If I travel out with you and we travel out with a 5-year-old, by the time we're coming back after 6 months, that child will have a different accent from what we have.
Yes.
We might still maintain our accent. But that child, because that child is at the formative stage, so that child between 0 to 6 can take at least 4 languages conveniently without getting mixed up. So now that we're embracing that in Nigeria, the other thing is, what does the curriculum look like for 0 to 6-year-old? Because when the foundation is faulty, what can the righteous do? There's a problem in Nigeria at the moment because we're not taking that area to be very important. The early years education is very, very germane to the child's learning. Because when you actually lay very solid foundation where the child is able to read and write, there's good phonic knowledge, the child is able to segment and blend effectively well. That child, by the time they get into primary 2, they'll start flowing because there is something that they can write. So reading and writing becomes better. And also, if you go to a WAEC level, you will see that most of our students sometimes, when you ask me, Ronke, why are people not passing WAEC so well, particularly in comprehension? Our people are seriously decoding but not comprehending. And that's because foundation has been faulty in education, in literacy.
But not comprehending.
Yes, we're decoding but not comprehending. Because there are so many inference questions, there are so many things that they'll be asking them. But if only we can go back and get that foundation right, education becomes a better place. Because if you get literacy right, children will flourish in science, they will flourish in every curriculum area. So we expect every teacher coming to sit for professional qualifying exam to be very good in foundation literacy, foundation maths, digital literacy, safeguarding, and pedagogy.
Good.
So it will have a knock-on effect. And because teachers already know about this now, it's making them to read. Because we've got to change the mindset in Nigeria. So with all this, I must say, we'll get good education.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. All right. So I want to go to something that, I'm not sure, Malade, if it's you that mentioned about safer learning spaces and accountability, right? So how can we ensure, and you talked about sexual exploitation more specifically, where you said we need to have safeguarding for children. How can we ensure that our learning spaces, because it's like some are out of school, but then you go into school. How can we ensure that it is a safe learning space and that we can hold people accountable when it is violated?
Okay, thank you very much. So the thing is, we're in a world where we have IT systems everywhere. So I think one of the first ones is to invest in having surveillance in our schools. With proper surveillance system, it reduces the chances of perpetrating some of these abuses, either physical, sexual, or otherwise, on our children. So it's very important for schools these days to have, even not just schools now, even the community as a whole needs to invest a lot in surveillance, because that's one of the first ways to keep an environment safe is to have it, lightened up, have it seen to not just you, someone else can see what you're doing.
Yes.
It keeps you in check. If you have any thoughts, okay, I'm not the only one that can do this.
Yes.
Someone else is seeing me. It regulates you to an extent and reduce the level of how you want to perpetrate whatever it is that your mind is bubbling up with.
Yeah.
So we need to invest in surveillance. We also need to invest in core values of integrity. let your personality be well defined. Let your mind be well defined to what you are going to do with the child or the pupil you're teaching. Some people they say we have abusive adults, all right, because they are also abused while they were young. And I remember a friend once told me, I want to be a teacher. While we're still students, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. I was like, why? I want to beat somebody's child. And I was like, why would you say, but they beat me a lot? And there are still teachers these days that feel if I do not beat, the child is not going to learn. Which I'm not saying discipline should not be instilled, but not to the point of abuse.
Absolutely.
And that's the point there. We need to also rethink how we qualify discipline.
Right.
You can discipline a child without abuse. Even some children, when you speak to them in some tone, it just keeps them in their shell.
Yes.
And I remember a child was saying, anytime he's going to school, mommy will say, when he's approaching school, he starts saying he's having tummy upsets. And I'm like, why are you having tummy upsets every time you are going to school? You know, we investigate, was like the teacher in class has been very forceful. So it's not just the child now saying he's having tummy upsets.
Yes.
It's about, I don't want to be in that class because there's something scary
that
happening
happens
in that class.
in
So
that
with a good surveillance system, of course, it restricts the teachers and whoever
Abusing
adults
the
that is
space
there
they
to
learn.
want to, you know, use the power they have as an adult over the
Over
child.
the learner.
For us at Teach for Nigeria, for instance, with our fellows who are in the classrooms, regardless of the subject that you are teaching, whether it's math, English, science, whatever it is, it needs to be value-based learning. And there's so many ways that you can actually teach those values whilst you're teaching whatever subject it is that you're teaching. And it's extremely important because what you end up with, if you neglect the values part, is you end up with people who have the degrees but can't fit into society.
Exactly.
You have people who are unable to thrive. You have people who, for instance, I have the degree, but I can't get a job. I can't stay in a job, or I can't even keep a family, or I can't keep a community. So I think that schools have a very important role to play when it comes to thinking about values. And it doesn't have to be let's have a values class. It's actually every single class that I teach. How are we ensuring that teachers are also well-trained, just as Dr. Shiombo has said, to be able to infuse value-based training into every single subject that is taught in schools? So when we are thinking about a holistic person, if there's such a word, or someone who's well-rounded, it's important that in education, we're thinking constantly and being intentional about infusing value-based education into any subject that we teach. So it's not necessarily about having a separate class for values and ethics, which is great. But my science teacher, my biology teacher, my agri teacher should always be thinking about how do I infuse value-based learning into the curriculum, into my teaching, from how we're doing group work together, how we're having the interaction with one another. And I think that is how we can definitely strengthen the education system so that when learners pass through, they come out complete.
Yes, and not just with certificates,
and not just
but with actual values.
Yes.
Well, this is a great place to take another break. When we return, we will take some questions from the audience. Welcome back. We are still talking about rethinking the value of a Nigerian education, and we still have our guests with us. So now we'll go to the audience for a question.
Thank you for the pleasant session so far. It has been really interesting. My question is, what is that one skill that every Nigerian child should graduate with beyond academics if they are to compete globally?
Wow. That's a very important question. That's a very important question. Dr. Shiombo, do you want to take that?
Thank you very much. With the 21st century skills, I must say the 4 C's is what we're always very proud of now. Every child coming out of our schools must know how to have the collaborative skills. How do I collaborate with other people? How do I actually manage people? How do I work with other people? How do I listen to them? So that it's not just about me, it's about me working as part of a team. And another skill we always ask students to be proud of when they're about graduating is creativity. You have to be very creative in your thoughts. You have to be creative in your ways, in your mindset. that when I see this, oh, there is something on this table. How can I actually turn this to gold? At all times, we must be very creative. And that's where a lot of teachers must really, really support our children so that they're not just, because myopic learning has left the classroom now. We're not looking for myopic learning. It's not just about what the teacher knows. Give them opportunity to actually brainstorm, to find out things. And by so doing, it improves their creativity. Another thing that we must not forget is critical thinking. Every child must be given inquiry-based learning. What it does to them is it makes them to grow. It makes them to have a profound knowledge of whatever they are learning. So there must be opportunity for critical thinking. The last but not the least is communication. We must allow our children, because the fact that the classroom is quiet does not mean there's good learning going on. Children can talk to themselves, they can work in groups, you can do ability groupings, but allow them at all times to promote speaking and listening. So speaking and listening is very germane, because by the time they actually go out into that into that world out there, they'll be able to use those 4 skills to manage themselves very well.
Amazing. Do we have another question?
All right, thank you. Good, my question. If you could redesign the Nigerian education for the next generation, what's the very first thing you would change?
Wow. If you could redesign Nigeria's education for the next generation. Abiodun, let me start with you and I'll come to you, Molade.
Our curriculum these days needs to change. You know, we need to go into a world where we are looking at the global concepts. In the days before now, right, children learn computing with assumption. Let's assume you're holding a mouse and you are clicking on right click. You know, we need to make it as real as possible. Digitalized learning needs to come into every of our classroom. And it means that we need to invest a lot in resources, bringing resources into practice. For example, right, some children would not be able to figure out 1 + 1 is 2 because of some neurological condition that affects them, dyscalculia in quotes now, right? But if I have resources where I can put 1 and 1 together and count it, it helps my brain formation to be able to understand better that, okay, learning is not just about having to cram and give, but I can actually work it out, which is what we do in the real sense of the word. How many, if we go to the bank these days, before they give you your money, they will count it with a machine. Not, so they won't say, okay, I'm going to figure out 50 + 50, and then they are not assuming it.
Yes.
They are going to actually, so we need to bring them into using resources appropriately. If you go to you know, the Chinese world, they practice some of those things right firsthand from the basic learning. And that's why I appreciate a lot of some schools now where they bring real life incidents, real life practice, practical life into school. And it's something that I want to generalize for our children to be able to do better. So they can explore and they can learn. And coupled with what Doctor said, while we're doing that, we're exploring, we're learning, we're communicating, we're comprehending. All of the skills will come together with the appropriate resources available at your disposal.
Fabulous. Molade, what would you add to that?
You know, I was going to speak to the curriculum as well, but I would probably go with access. And I think we need to demystify that learning only happens in the 4 walls of a classroom. So if I was to, you know, rethink it and think about it differently, it's how do we ensure that every single child of school age has access to education? And that means just, you know, removing that barrier of the 4 walls of a classroom. And that means various things. You know, we were talking about the silver bullet earlier. We need to try different approaches for everyone to have access, from radio school, which we do at Teach for Nigeria, to school in the classroom, if that is what we want to do, to community schooling, you know, under the tree as well. We could have learning in there, to vocational training, to so much more. So for me, it would be demystifying what learning really needs.
To give access.
I
love that. We've had such an interesting conversation today on our topic, rethinking the value of a Nigerian education. Education needs to go beyond certificates and enable young minds to solve real problems, build sustainable livelihoods and systems. I would like to thank our guests for their insightful contributions, our live audience for your incredible energy, and our viewers for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and share your thoughts on today's episode using the hashtag #TheNigeriaWeWant. I'm Abosede Jojogan, and until the next episode, remember, women's leadership can change everything, everywhere.